Well, I've always had an interest in war and how terrible it is, and peace to end it all. And therefore, I was very involved in World War II in the sense that we went to Washington, where my husband, Jim, was employed about the war with several jobs. And Washington was a delightful place because partly everybody else had gone to Washington to do what they could about the war. And that's why we were there. So it made it a very stimulating spot to be in. Everybody with an idea was there. And I had a hard time leaving it, as a matter of fact. But on the other hand, it was kind of an ideal spot to work on this problem I was most interested in, which was developing a lasting peace through the United Nations. And it was everybody was willing to join. It's very interesting to compare the psychology of when the war was going on and people's willingness to do anything, and now, how many years later, 20 or something like that, people have to really be sold on the United Nations, the purpose of which, of course, is to eliminate war, to avoid war, and to hopefully make peace a stable development. Well, I really was so intrigued with Washington, I didn't want to come back. But this is where I belonged, I knew, and for two reasons. One, our house, our living quarters are here, Jim's business is here, and so on. But also, it is probably as important, if not more so, to develop opinions, which the United Nations Association is all about, to work in local communities. And I thought if we started a local community organization for that purpose here in Iowa, it might help others to grow. And of course there are other state UNAs. Oh, I searched my mind trying to think of a person or an event that would attract a lot of attention. And there isn't anybody that could fill that position as well or better than Eleanor Roosevelt. And so with my fingers crossed, I called her and asked her if she'd be willing to do it. And she was always very gracious and very willing to give her time to this. And so she did come out. But incidentally, that reminds me of the story that I like about Mrs. Roosevelt, because she was the First Lady. And after her husband died, she came to the UNA office in New York, and she said to Clark Eichelberger, who was at that time the chairman of UNA, and she said, "Could I help?" Which we always felt was very amusing because the answer was obvious. So Mrs. Roosevelt came out, and just as was foretold, she made an enormous impression here in Burlington. She spoke at our auditorium, which is a large one, and of course I've gone there many times for musical events and other meetings, And I have never, up to that time, seen our auditorium not only filled, but with an equal number of people standing outside. It was an overwhelming success, just as we had hoped for it. And she has repeated coming out for us twice for state meetings at the State House. Des Moines had the largest meetings, partially because Mrs. Roosevelt was a part of them, and her drawing power was immense, and it's a larger city. And so we made a big thing of that event, and we decorated the State House from top to bottom, and there were many groups that co-sponsored with us, including the various veterans groups. And actually, one of the things that was accomplished when they were working with us was that each participating group bought a flag for the State House. And those flags still indicate on their poles what group gave it to, UNA and the state of Iowa. It was such a colorful project and so effective in terms of wonderful publicity. And Helen Blackburn thought it up, initiated it, saw that it went all the way through as a great project. And what it was the offer by UNA to anybody, I guess, who wished to participate, who would design a banner that had to do with the kind of things that UNA works on. And it amazed me that there were so many banners that came in and were hung in the rotunda of the State House so everybody could see them. And it was a success on that score too. And they were very imaginative, and there were 3 honors given to the 3 women who developed these. And it was just a wonderful success, thought up by one person for a state-level project that received tremendous publicity, and everything I could say about it would be true. And having a great idea, if you have a great idea that you're convinced is great, you can do that. Well, I feel particularly good about one that happened with our Burlington chapter. And it started, interestingly, I think, by 2 students from Iowa City. One was black, one was white. And they had discussed this on their way down to Burlington, and they wanted to make this their summer project. And I was the first one they came to in Burlington, and I was sitting on the floor painting, which was a very important part of my life at the time. And I said, well, I'm terribly interested in your suggestion, which was a community self-survey, so-called, that was born at Fisk University. And I said, well, I will arrange for an audience for you. And this happened in one of the churches. There were about 25 people there, many of them black, and they all wanted to do it. And so we started. That was the beginning of it all. And the results of this, that's the important thing, were most rewarding. Theaters no longer reserve special sections for Negro patrons. The municipal swimming pool is now available to everyone, and I'll never forget that because the swimming pool is quite close to our house. And I rushed over on the first day with my bathing suit, and sure enough, there were quite a few black swimmers there, and that was most rewarding. All of these were. Bowling alleys have ended a policy of segregation. All major hotels render their services to everybody. Recent check shows no discriminatory practices remain in the recreation field. That's a lot, but that's only in the field of public service and sports. In housing, and I might say that it was the most difficult issue to get a committee to form. And I was at the point where I thought we'd have to, and of course it's very important that we'd have to skip it completely, because I failed for 2 years. And finally, without anybody calling him a person involved in housing and real estate called and said, "I'll do it." He had turned me down once before, and I nearly fainted. It was wonderful to have that because that completed the picture. And we had a group working on employment, and in all these cases we were doing surveys as to exactly what the situation was. And those were the issues that we addressed. We're very proud of it because it means, as I told the Fisk University meeting in New York, where I went to speak on this, that a Negro college in the East had made a great deal of difference in the life of a small city in Iowa, and that was nice. Well, it was terribly exciting from my point of view, and from everybody's point of view. There was an enormous attendance, and that in itself was not only exciting, but it posed all kinds of problems once we got to Nairobi. That being that they expected I think 3,000 attendants there, and were well equipped to take care of that. Besides, Nairobi was all painted up and with flower pots sitting around and so forth, expecting quite a crowd. But it turned out that the first day of our checking in, not only 3,000 but 17,000 came, and you can imagine the results. Everybody forgot about the flowers and the fresh paint. We had reservations for one of the central hotels because we wanted to be in the center of things, and we had every reason to think that's where we would be. Instead, we were bused 25 miles out, and nothing like the center of things, to what was originally a Mau Mau detention camp. It is now a small college. We were very comfortably situated in rooms and very well fed and had no complaints whatsoever, but it wasn't what we expected. Then the next day, as I've suggested, we signed in, and to everybody's surprise, there was 3 or 4 times the number of those expected. But that all actually helped make it exciting. And of course, being in a very, very different culture, with different clothes, different everything, different faces, made it that much more interesting. Well, contrary to the two previous conferences held by the UN, the first one that you may remember, and others too, was in Mexico. And that was not good. And I can't tell you all of the reasons why, except for the fact that they had an agenda and issues on which to take action, and they couldn't come to any decisions. It was that kind of a meeting. Then the next conference was in Copenhagen, and we had high hopes there because everybody was bound and determined that this wouldn't happen again. It did. And again, we were all disappointed. The next one was Nairobi, and we'd be damned if we let that happen on the second round, and it didn't. And we were all scared to death it would, and it would mean that all these international conferences were practically for nothing. And at the very end, and we all had our fingers crossed, and at the very end, why, due to a lot of effort on the part of a lot of people, we got our agenda through. So it was altogether a very satisfying experience. Plus the experience of just being in a fascinating spot, which is Nairobi. Rio de Janeiro was a very mixed experience. It is incredibly beautiful there. The city itself, the surroundings of the city, we went outside of Rio a couple of times into the country, and that is equally beautiful. So that was very, very satisfying. As to the issues before the conference, and this was on the problem of environment. That too was mixed. The world as a whole, a majority of the countries came through in their support of the issues before the conference. One exception which bothered us was the United States. And my own feeling was that the president at that time, Mr. Bush, didn't truly understand the issues that faced us in the sense of what the conference was about. And if he had thoroughly understood the issues, I think he would have gone along with what we were there about, the whole problem of saving our environment, on which we all depend, after all. But he didn't, and there was opposition to it, so to that degree it was understandable. We did start the movement, however, and there are continuing local issue discussions all around the country, and that in itself probably made it worthwhile. I feel the biggest challenge that I have felt over the years, and do now particularly, is continuing vital alive type leadership. Because I think back when all of this began and realized how comparatively easy it was directly after the war, when people realized how war hurts, which led to their immediate acceptance of the UN and other efforts to make a definite stoppage to war and to build a creative peace. The UNA is known and calls itself a study organization, or an organization for study of international problems. And I don't want to downgrade study. It's essential to begin with, but if it is not followed up by action, it isn't what we're here for. We're here to relate to our local communities, our state, to see that they are aware of what each year the UN has accomplished and what its problems are. And to cite an enormous problem, it is that the United States of America has not paid up its dues, on which the UN is very dependent. Not only of the UN Association, but I am told by others, by all associations around the country or organizations, and that is leadership that will follow through and not drop it when their term is over, but to see that there is continuing interest and people with interest and ability to keep up with the issues of the day and relate the UN problems, whatever they are, to those issues.